Hello, everybody. This is Brandon Jamal Baker, author of the book Where I Belong, available right now on Amazon. Welcome back to my channel, Where I Belong with Brandon J. Baker. So today, I'm gonna continue this path of vulnerability and transparency, and I'm just gonna speak from my heart about a topic that I'm very passionate about. It's something that I'm starting to see as a reoccurring event within the culture. I've spoken out about it on several platforms. Shout out to the bros at the Viral Way. Also to the Reckless podcast as well. I spoke out about it. If you follow me on my Instagram, you see I've also spoken out about it. And the topic I'm going to talk about today is race and racism, particularly between two of the most marginalized communities, that would be the black and brown communities. Um, and so I would just speak for myself. Number one, I'm against any form of racism. Um, I believe that it's predicated on hatred towards one another. Um, but I also extend compassion and grace because I understand that, in order to hate someone, there has to be a bit of hate within for yourself, um, because that's my personal experience. And so I just like to believe that I'm not alone in that. I do believe that people can change, because it really just goes back to the mindset. And if we have a growth mindset and we are curious about other people within this world, we can begin to grow, evolve, and change. So for me, I would just start off by saying that once upon a time, I did have a racist ideology towards the Hispanic population. It wasn't something that I was taught. It wasn't something that someone made me do. It was based on my own personal experience. So um, I share this story when I was 13 years old. It was me and my best friend Ibram. Rest in peace, he's since passed away. Um, but I remember we were 13 years old. This was like the summer of 1995. Um, and we were like in La Puente somewhere, and we had two girlfriends who just happened to be Mexican girls. And we were coming home at night, at the bus stop, and there was an Astro van of older Hispanic guys. They just pulled up on us and was like, "Hey, you effing mayates." They threw a beer bottle at us and they just started like chasing us. And I just remember like just running for my life. Like I was so scared. Um, and I just remember afterwards, by the grace of God, we got away. Um, and I just remember like afterwards, like the shame that I felt, the guilt that I felt of like, how dare these guys like have me scared. And I just didn't like that feeling. And I remember shortly after that, I went and got a gun. And so I just remember that like I just said that was never going to happen again. If they ever run up on me, like they're not going to ask me where I'm from, they're not even going to get a chance, I'm just going to shoot. That was my mindset. And that was directed towards every person that looked like those guys that chased us. That was my trauma. Um, it began to progress, going to high school. I remember my freshman year in high school at Nogales High School. Shout out to all my Nobles fan out there, alumni. Um, I got kicked out of school for having a race riot on campus. Like, I mean, it was just, it was like it was preparing me for prison. Like, literally, when I share my story and I look back and reflect, I can see my life from beginning all the way to the time I was released from prison and see how all these circumstances and how I began to internalize and rationalize what was going on. It was preparing me for prison, even all the way down to high school where there was separation. Like, I mean, it was even like you were going to school, you will feel the tension because it was racism going on within the community. Like I said, I'm from West Covina. I'm, never shy about a couple of things, my faith in Christ, I never shy away from that. My experience of being formerly incarcerated, I never shy away from that. And also my hometown, being from West Covina, I never shy away from that. But I remember in 1995, it was hectic. It was racist. There was gang-related murders, primarily against black and brown, killing each other. And you had us, teenagers, kids, in the midst of that. And like in the school, like, I mean, it was literally blacks would be over here, Hispanics would be over here, and then it was like, it was just like a ticking time bomb. And so, yeah, I was in a riot at the school. I got kicked out. And then shortly after that, I was sent to juvenile hall for the first time. And I talk about my experience in juvenile hall. I wrote about it in my book. The first time I went to juvenile hall, I knew I was going to prison one day because, for those who are familiar with the lawsuit in LA County against the probation department in Los Padrinos Juvenile Hall, which we called LP, anybody that's ever been there, they had a thing called Gladiator School for kids. I mean, so it was like, soon as you come in there, the reception unit is AB. Soon as you go into AB, they're going to first ask you how old you are. They're going to look at your file, how old you are, so they know where to put you. And then they're going to see where you're from, what gang you represent. And then they're going to make sure that they put you around people that you are enemies with. And I only went, my first time I went to LP, it was for 3 days. It was like a scare straight program. And within that time, I had 2 fights back to back, and I was sent to the box. They don't even call it the hole in juvenile hall. Anybody's ever been there, they call it the box. And so there was a older staff, which I wrote about as well, and he happened to be from La Puente. And so as soon as he seen me, he was like, he's looking at my file, he's like, do you bang? I was like, no. Even though I was lying at the time, but I was like, no, because of course this is authority. I'm not gonna sit here and, tell them, where I'm from. Like, that's your job to try to figure out. And so he looked at my file and he was like, oh yeah, you effed up. He's like, I got some little homeboys for you. And sure enough, I went to GH. That's where they sent the 13 and 14-year-olds. And as soon as I got in there, I was just in my cell. The door opened up, escorted me, into the day room. And 2 other Hispanic kids who happened to be from Puente. I had to fight both of them. And, I won those fights, which made the staff even more mad. And then the staff assaulted me, Hispanic staff. And I was sent to the box, and I was in there just so angry. I would roll up the mattress and just punch on the mattress. Like, I would just take out my anger and violence to a mattress, because there was nobody in there, that I could take out that anger and frustration to. But when I got home, there was a whole race of people I was able to take my anger and frustration out on. The gang that I, was from was a predominantly small gang in the area that was surrounded by a lot of big Hispanic gangs. And so I just wanted to prove myself, not only to my peers, but prove myself to myself, because it still went back to that time of me running when I was 13 years old. So fast forward, there was a situation that happened that I had a real hard time forgiving myself. And I was finally able to forgive myself through the form of narrative therapy and just writing about, this situation that happened. But there was a good friend of mine who happened to be Mexican. And when we went to elementary school, Hollingsworth Elementary, shout out to, the hometown once again. But, we were really good friends. We had a common bond of like basketball cards. I used to collect basketball cards, Upper Deck. I remember having a Shaq rookie card, Orlando Magic, and so he was also into the basketball cards. I was spending the night at his house. He was spending the night at my house. I know his mom, his dad, his little sister, all of the, and then I just remember, when we got to like high school, he joined a gang, I joined a gang. We were at odds with one another, and I forgot that like he was my friend at one point in time. So the first time I was sent to probation camp was actually for, we assaulted, this guy. I would never say any body's name that I have personally caused harm to, for sake of not wanting to further any other harm, but also not to glorify, my lifestyle and what I was a part of once upon a time. But there was me and six other of my friends, and we brutally assaulted this guy. Um, he didn't know any of my friends. He didn't know their names, but he definitely knew mine. And he notified authority. Well, of course, told his mom and stuff, and they notified authority. Long story short, the police came searching for me. I was on the run. This was during the time I was homeless, and finally I got arrested. And I just remember seeing his mother in the courtroom crying and like, Brandon, how could you? Like, how could you do this? Like, to my son? Like, and I just remember at that time, like, I was just so numb and just cold and just hard-hearted, callous-hearted, to where I was like, only thing I could think about was like, he told on me. Like, that was the only thing that was in my mind. And I was thinking like, I should have just finished him. Like, I should have just killed him. I wouldn't be in here. Um, until just fast forward, when I began to change my life, I began to do the work. And then I just started to think like, damn, he was my friend. Like, how could I? Like, I felt a lot of shame. Like, how could I have been so cruel to do this to a person that was once upon a time my friend? Um, so, whenever I see people out here, promoting racism, it's very traumatizing for me. It's very triggering to me. Um, I also talk about, my friend Dante, who was shot and killed in the car with me. He was killed by, Hispanics. So I saw a lot of this stuff going around. I remember living in Azusa, seeing NK on the wall, monkeys move out of here. My uncle was shot in Pomona by Hispanics. So was my nana as well too. So, there was a lot of personal hatred, not because of what I was told. It was what I was personally firsthand experiencing. Um, being in um, LA County Jail back in 2000, going to Pomona Court, and there might be 5 blacks going to court. And when you're in that holding tank, before you get on the bus, and there's 30 Hispanics, San Gabriel Valley pretty much produces some of the most largest Hispanic gangs. And when they see me or something and they just decide to rush us, then what are we going to do? It's 30 on 5 and we're in there fighting for our lives. So that was just more hatred that was produced. So by the time I got to prison, it was like, this is where I belong. Once again, the title of the book, Where I Belong. Everywhere I went, it was like, this is where I'm supposed to be. And I remember going to the first prison, New Folsom, level 4, 180, which at the time, early 2000, it was the most violent prison in the state of California. And I remember just going to the yard. You'll feel the tension. You can just cut it with a knife. Blacks are over here, Hispanics are over there, and you better not cross this line. You go into that area, you're gonna get butchered. They come into this area, they're gonna get butchered. There's knives everywhere, and so, but I thrived in that kind of environment because I was like, I didn't like them anyway. That was me back then. So, but I know that was something that, like, my life had just prepared me for this moment right now. And I say that because I can speak with authority when I say that change is possible. We need that change, because I always talk about my favorite rapper, Tupac Shakur, rest in peace, in his song To Live and Die in LA, when he has that line where he says it wouldn't be LA without Mexicans. Black love, brown pride, and the sets again. Pete Wilson trying to see us all broke. I'm on some bullshit, out for everything they owe. And so that message was so powerful and pivotal, because what he's saying is, Pete Wilson, at the time the governor, and he's speaking for politicians in general, have a plan to pit us against each other, to have us hating each other. But when we understand is that we're stronger together and we can actually overcome, any circumstance that was put against us, we have to be smarter than that. And this is why I believe is that, like, education is the key. I also talk about, my faith, in Christ. And when I first gave my life to Christ, one of the persons who actually mentored me and laced me like about, sound doctrine was my brother Fernando. shout out to him, man. I mean, people think that I can preach or I have a gift, but whatever you guys saw in me, I saw it magnified in him 10 times over. Um, and so I also just began to like study, learning my history, learning about, because there's a lot of black history that intersects within the brown history as well too. Something is like slavery. When our people were escaping, the horrors of slavery, they found refuge in Mexico. You know, and also to learn that blacks have actually fought alongside Mexicans during the Mexico-America War. So just to see, I mean, the history with the Black Panthers and the Brown Berets. So there has always been an intersectionality between our communities, and there was always a plan to pit us against each other, the crabs in the barrel, if you will. But I also talk about 2042 is going to be the year that America, for the first time upon its conception, will be considered a minority majority nation. And so we really have to begin to visualize what that's going to look like. I also talk about my personal journey, here at Cal State Los Angeles, my education journey being, pretty much credited to my brother, Edwin out there, Edwin Cruz. I talk about him a lot. And him not even knowing that he actually impacted me and inspired me to pursue my education. And so like a lot of my friends that I have right now, that I don't even consider them like friends. These are my brothers, like this is family, And I also know a lot of Hispanics who were from gangs that were predominantly racist throughout all Southern California, some that pushed NK, but you see them today and like you would not see any of that stuff. Why? Because they educated themselves. We began to see is that, the differences that we have pale in comparison to the similarities we have with one another. First and foremost, we are human beings. Every last person that walks this earth, we are human. So we are connected to that. We all come from the same source. We all come from the same creator. Whatever you believe, there's something within you that believes that there is something outside of this that brought us all here today, right? And so just from that understanding, the spiritual component, to know that we are all interconnected to one another. That's number one. Number two, as a black man speaking to other black men, black women, brown men and women, or anyone else who's experienced being marginalized due to their race or gender, social, economic class, we have been oppressed, period. Enough with the trauma shaming. We were in slavery, or this land was stolen from us. It doesn't matter. There's not one that's worse than the other. It's the same. It's oppression, right? And it's wrong. And we have to be able to speak out against it. This ICE situation, right? I've been very vocal about it because I think it's wrong. And it triggers me because it takes me right back to the times of slavery. When authority had, free will to just run into people's homes, capture, kidnap people, enslave them. And that's the same thing that's happening right now with ICE, and so I just think it's important for us to come together, to press a message of, not just unity, because we know unity at times, it can be shaky, it can be frail, but we need to push a message of peace. We need to push a message of peace. Like, you don't have to love me in order to be at peace with me. But I think that first starts within. So I think it's a time for us to like really reflect